Welcome to this video. Great to have you on board. In this video, I'll dive into React Native together with you. I'll explain what it is and we'll build a simple application with it where we can get our current location and share it with other users and see the position of other users on a map. So that's pretty cool, I think, and it will cover a lot of features React Native is all about. React Native, in case you weren't aware, is a library that builds up upon React and JavaScript and allows you to build native mobile apps, so apps for iOS and Android, that use React and JavaScript for you during the build process, during development, but then are real native apps that you distribute over the app stores that run natively on these devices. So let's have a look at how all of that works and how we can get started. Before we install anything and write any code, let's understand what React Native is. There's this one sentence you'll read from time to time when you come across React Native. It's learn once, write everywhere. That's kind of the theme of React Native. As I said at the intro of this video, React Native builds up upon React and JavaScript. Hence, we can use our JavaScript and React knowledge to build mobile apps, which of course sounds awesome. With React Native, we build apps that we still tailor for iOS or Android, but we don't have to write any Java or Swift code. And we learn the technology once to then write apps for iOS and Android. What React Native don't is, it's not an app which provides you with a component library of pre-styled components that look like material design on Android and iOS design on iOS. It instead gives you core building blocks which you can take, which you then have to style and compose on your own. But you will see this in this video. The idea behind React Native, of course, still is that we write real mobile apps, and I want to emphasize that, real native apps, not wrapped in some web view or anything like that, with JavaScript and React and the React Native library, which gives us a lot of utilities, helpers, and a couple of other things you will see in this video. So what is a React Native app, and maybe more importantly, what is it not? When you build an app with React Native, you're not building a web page running in the browser on your mobile device. That's not the case. You're not building a web page. You're also not building a web app that's hosted in a web view, like it would be the case for Ionic or Cordova apps. There you build a web app with CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and then Cordova gives you a wrapper that will lead to a native app being created that is distributed over the app stores, but that wrapper just wraps your web page, so to say. So you got a native app, but don't really have native code under the hood. And that can lead to performance issues, or at least to worse performance than for native apps. The big advantage, of course, is that you got all the web stack technologies at your disposal, and you build your native app just as you build a web app. For React Native, it's different. There we have a real native app because all the UI is going to get compiled to native code. That's really important. We're going to get a native app out of that. The JavaScript part is going to stay JavaScript, but all of the UI elements, the buttons and so on, will be the native equivalents depending on which platform we're running on. That gives us better performance, but it also makes the development a bit harder because we're not really working with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. To be precise, we won't work with CSS at all. It's not supported. We won't work with traditional HTML elements at all. It's not in there. You will see what we got instead. And we can use JavaScript, but only the features that are supported by the environment React Native gives us. Now, I'll come back to all these things throughout the video though. So why don't we just get started and build our first React Native app? To get started with building React Native apps, I recommend the official docs, to which you can find a link in the video description. There's a getting started page, and for now we'll go with the quick start, though we'll soon go into a more elaborate project setup. But let's start with the quick start. Now, there you see one instruction, one installation command that might look familiar to you if you've worked with React. For React projects, so not React Native, just React, there is a package called Create React App, which makes it easy to get started with React projects and gives you a nice project with a nice build workflow out of the box. Now there's an equivalent for React Native. It's called create React Native app, and we can just copy that command to install that tool on our machine. Now on Mac and Linux, you probably need to add sudo in front of it to get the right permissions, and then you're prompted to enter your password. And now this will install this package globally on your machine. Once this is done, you can create a new project by running create React Native app as a command. So here I navigated into the folder where I want to create my project, and then I'll name it share places. You can choose any name you want. This will create a new folder and install all the required dependencies. Here you can see it's using Yarn, an alternative to NPM, which I got installed. Check it out if you're facing any issues with NPM and that setup process. Also make sure to not use NPM version 5, at least at the point I'm recording this. It's buggy, use version 4 instead. And once all of that is finished, we actually can start our app already. We can navigate into the newly created folder and run npm start. Now this will build the project and spin up a development server, so that's pretty cool. You still get these web development-like features where your native app will actually connect to that development server to get live updates and so on. And now you can do something cool. You can visit the App Store on your real smartphone, the real device you own, and search for an app named Expo. Expo Client is the exact name. And if you got it, you can open it and scan that QR code you should see here. And this will connect your development server and launch your app on your real device. Though, and that's important, only in a wrapper. It doesn't really install it on your device, it just wraps your app. That's also why I won't use this approach here, because whilst it's nice to see something quickly on the phone, if you want to dig into native features of your app, so you want to use some native features like maps and so on, you can face difficulties with this wrapper, and if you ever want to publish your app and build it for the app stores, you need to leave this process here. So therefore, I will quit this process and run npm run eject, which is a command that gets out of that wrapped world here and gives us access to the full workflow, to the real native app and to the full capabilities of React Native, so to say. Though I will say this Expo approach is great and you can build apps with that too, but I like the original approach. So I'll run npm run eject. I'll choose a React Native project which I want to create. Give it a name as it should appear on the user device screens. Share places maybe. And then Android and Xcode Studio project name, because you can open that project in Android Studio and Xcode, which are the IDEs for developing native apps. And you will need to do this, especially for Xcode, if you add certain libraries that hook into real native device features. Now with that, we got this running. By the way, if you ever during npm start encounter an error, there should be also 2 commands you can copy in to fix that error immediately. So make sure to run these commands in that case. So with that, we got this working. Now it would be nice to see it in a code editor. So let's open the project in one. And here I opened it in Visual Studio Code. You could also use WebStorm, Atom, or Sublime, whatever you like. Now in there you'll see this Expo folder with some configuration. More importantly, Android and iOS, these folders hold the actual config files and builds of the native app, so don't delete them. In these files, you also find the projects you can open with Android Studio, open the full folder, or iOS, open the .xcode project file. We got Node modules, which holds all the dependencies of our JavaScript project, and then a couple of config files. And then there are 2 important files. Index.js kicks off our app by calling this strange app registry here in the end. And there it registers a function that returns our app component. And that app component can be found in the app.js file, and it's a normal React component. We import React, the normal React we also use in web projects. We create a component by extending React component. We have a render method. We export that component. And in the render method, we render some JSX, though, and that's important, you won't see a div, a span, a h1 tag, anything like that here. Because, and this is the most important takeaway you should take away from this video, React Native doesn't work with the normal HTML elements. It doesn't work with the normal DOM, it doesn't work with the normal CSS, it doesn't even work with the same JavaScript support as in the browser. All of that is given to you by React Native, and CSS isn't given to you at all. So instead of the normal DOM elements like a div, a span, h1, and so on, you use a couple of components provided by React Native, which we therefore import from the React Native package, like the view, which essentially is your div replacement, and the text, which would be your paragraph or span replacement. And you can find a full list of all the components on the official docs. If you scroll down, you will find a components section with all the components that are built into React Native. And you will see that these aren't too many, because React Native is a lot about you building your own interfaces. It gives you some core building blocks, but you have to build your app on your own. And for a lot of features, like later when we add a map, we will also have to go to a third-party package to get that functionality, because React Native really only gives you the core to work with. So this is our code. Important maybe, that style sheet thing here at the bottom. Now I mentioned that CSS isn't part of React Native apps, it's not supported. This syntax here might look like CSS, but it's just JavaScript. And React Native gives you this style sheet object to create optimized JavaScript objects that basically allow you to define classes, like this property here, which then hold a couple of properties, which you then can assign to components. Now again, this is not CSS, it just emulates CSS, and it doesn't support all CSS features. For a list of the supported features, also check the video description, there is a cheat sheet to be found there. So this is our component, this is how it works. Now let's view it. And I want to view it on a simulator. Now you can also go back to the official docs, and on the Getting Started guide, if you click on Building Projects with Native Code, you can choose your operating system and for which operating system you want to build. And then you can find detailed instructions on how to set everything up there. Important, if you want to build for iOS on Windows, that unfortunately won't work. That's not permitted by Apple, basically. You need Xcode to build an iOS app, and Xcode doesn't run on Windows. Other combinations like Android for Windows and so on are possible. So you will find installation instructions there, like for how to install Android on Windows. Make sure to follow through all these steps here at the bottom. Install Android Studio, install the SDK. Maybe not the latest version, but the one before that. The latest version often isn't supported. Install the Android Device Manager, the build support library, and so on. Make sure to also set your environment variables as described here. So basically follow through the full process here. And once you did that, open Android Studio and create a new virtual device there. You can also find instructions on how to do that here, preparing a virtual device. Here you find screenshots and so on. And in the end, you just launch it by clicking the play button. Once all of that is done, you can go into your project, open the terminal. That's the normal terminal, just integrated into my IDE, and run npm run Android. And the same, of course, for iOS once you set everything up there. This will open this terminal window where a process starts. That's your development server. Don't quit this. It's important to get live updates and for your app to continue running in development mode. This run Android process here will build your project now. Thereafter, it will finish and not keep running. So the development server is the only thing that keeps running. And this will now build the project and bundle it and ship it to the simulator and then also start it there. So once this is done, the app should start up on that simulator, which I started. Here it is, coming, needs to connect to the server. Now it's building on the server. And once that is done, once we reach 100% here, we should see our app run here on the left. And here it is. That's the text you see in app.js. Now let's quickly confirm this by adding our own text here, where we say it works maybe, like this. Let's save that. And now to get live updates, press Command M on Mac and Control M on Windows, and then click Enable Live Reload, or even hot reloading if you want. You can also manually reload here, or do that by pressing R twice, like this, and you should see your updated app here. Now that's really great. Of course, we don't just want to see some text here. We want to get the user location and also then share it with other users, display it on a map, and so on. Now to achieve that, we need to have a button. And I will create my own component for this. So I'll create a new folder, which I name components. You could also place this in a subfolder, which you name source if you want. And in that folder, I will add my fetch location component. It'll be a very simple one, but I want to show you that you can and that you will build your own components in React Native apps. Now here, I first of all will import React from React. So not React Native, just React. And then create a constant fetch location, which gets props and returns a function body. So that's just a functional component I'm creating here. And I'll export fetch location as the default of this file. And in there, I will return some JSX in my function. Now here I want to return a button. And therefore this is of course a very simple component. Does it make sense to just wrap a button? Maybe, we'll do it here. So I'll import my button from React Native. And then I can simply add it here. Button is a self-closing tag, that's important. It needs a title property to know which text to display. Here I'll write get location. And then it needs an onPress handler. Now in React for web projects, you would have onClick here to react to clicks. Now it's just onPress here to react to user touch events, to press events. And there, I don't want to handle this event in this file. I'll instead call some method I expect to get via props. So here I'll call on get location maybe. So I need to set a prop on the component when I use it and then hook it up to a method there. So let's use fetch location in app.js. There I will import fetch location with a capital F, as it's the convention for custom components, from /components fetch location. And then instead my text here, instead of that, I'll add fetch location. And now important, we need to set that on get location prop on that. So on get location prop should now refer to a method that then gets executed. So above the render method, I'll add a new method. Get user location handler maybe. I'll use this syntax where I assign an arrow function to a property to make sure that this always refers to my class. And then here I'll bind this get user location as a handler. Now if we save that, we reload, it should live reload. I'm not sure why it's not doing that, but anyways. If we save that, we should see that button. Now that button alone won't do much right now. Let's now simply log something to the console. Pressed the button. The question just is, how do we see the console now? We're not in a browser. Well, the cool thing is, if you open the developer tools, you can debug JavaScript remotely. This will open up a new browser tab. It should do so at least. Here I position it next to my simulator. And there you can open the developer tools. And now you will see the console log from your device here, which of course is cool for debugging. There's of course more you can do with debugging, and you'll find more information on that, as well as on React Native in general, in my Udemy course, to which you find a link in the video description. But for now, let's keep it as it is here. And now of course I don't want to log here, I want to get the user location, right? To get that location, we need to call some method probably. And here React Native actually exposes a web API to us. If we have a look at the official React Native docs, you will see that under guides, there is this JavaScript environment point. And there you find information about all the features all the JavaScript features you can use in your React Native app. Because it's not running in the browser. So you can't use the same features as in, let's say, the latest version of Chrome. Instead, it runs in a JavaScript environment spun up by React Native. So React Native decides which features you can use. Here you can find that information. And here you will find that there is a navigator geolocation object you can access. It's the same object you can use in the browser to get the user location. So here we can use navigator geolocation and then call get current position. This method expects two arguments. The first one is a callback function. Here I'll use an arrow function where I get the user position. So I'll log this to the console. And the second argument is an arrow function in case we got some, well, error. Now, if we save this and we go back to our application and we reload the app and click that button, the app actually crashes. Now, this happens because we don't have the permission to get the user position. And if we don't even tell our app that we will eventually need this permission, it will just crash. So what you can and should do is access the documentation on Navigator geolocation here in the React Native docs. And there you see how to set up the permissions on iOS, where you will basically need to edit the info plist file. And on Android, where you need to copy that entry here, this element, this uses permissions element, to your Android manifest. So here you can access the Android folder, go to app, go to source, and then to Android manifest. And there you see two permission entries, and you can copy that one into there. And you see we try to access the user location here in the end. Now with that entry, we basically make Android aware of that permission which our app eventually needs. And it would show that permission when we install it for the App Store. So now with that added, if we reload the app, it will still crash, because what we will need to do here after we edited the manifest, run Android. This will trigger a full rebuild, which we need here to ensure that our new Android manifest is taken into account. So let's make sure this happens. This will install a new version of the app. And thereafter, you can see I click this and I get objects being printed here on the right. And these, by the way, are not my real coordinates. Now, it might still fail at this point and give you some error saying that it timed out. In this case, you should go to the settings of your simulator by clicking the three dots here, and then to location, and send a location to the simulator, and also try going to settings and disable use detected ADB location and turn it back on. Also, waiting for just a minute or so sometimes resolves the issue, and thereafter you should be able to get a user location here. Now with that, we have a location. We want to display it on a map, right? So we need a map. Now there is no map built into React Native. If we have a look at the official docs and we scroll down to the components, you, at least at the point of time of recording this, won't find a map here. So we need a map, and there is a third-party library we can use. If you Google for React Native maps, you will find this library maintained by Airbnb. Airbnb uses React Native in their app, and they basically built this library which wraps the Google Maps and Apple Maps SDKs and gives you components you can use in your React Native app. And these components really will hook into the native code and give you access to the native code features, though for you with a nice JavaScript interface. You should visit the installation instructions the first time you are here. And there you see that first of all, we install it like any other JavaScript library with npm install. So let's do that. Let's run this command in our terminal in our project. And this will download React Native Maps and add it to the Node modules folder. Now, whilst this completes, we can also have a look at the next steps. Because since this library will actually hook into native device features using the native Maps SDKs, we need to link it to our apps. You can do that automatically with this command, though for this to work, you first of all need to run npm install -g React Native to have this tool available globally on your machine. But I will show you the manual linking way. Here are the explanations for iOS. I recommend the last way, option 3. And the steps here should be really clear on how to do this in Xcode. For Android, we follow these steps. And there, first of all, we take that code here and compile our project, our React Native Maps project. Now for that, you need Google Play Services installed, so make sure you checked this in your SDK manager in your Android Studio. And then just go to your Android folder, there to the app folder, and there to the build Gradle file. And important, there is another build Gradle file, one level above that. Don't go in there, go into the one in the app folder. Then if you scroll down, you will find a dependencies object, this one. And there simply add this new entry, compile project React Native App Maps. The next step is that we copy these two lines here and go to Android settings Gradle. So now this is directly in the Android folder, this file, and just paste them in at the end of that file. You may close that file thereafter. Next, you need a Maps API key. That's important. You're going to use the Google Maps API behind the scenes, and to be able to use it, you need a key. Now you can follow the link you see here. This should take you to the Google API console. You need to be logged in for that. There you should then choose a project here at the dropdown at the top. And then you can generate new credentials, a new API key. Now here I already got one, so I'll just copy that. You will now need to add a new entry to the application element in your Android manifest XML file. So let's go back to our project, app, source, Android manifest. And here in application, I'll temporarily store my key and then copy that metadata item. Don't overwrite the full application, just add this item here and then take your key and replace your Google Maps API key with that. Don't replace this here, this has to stay as it is, just the other part. With that, let's close that. And now there's one additional thing we need to do besides ensuring that we have Google Play services installed. Go down a little bit further and take this import here. And now go to the Java folder in app source main Java, to main application, and add this import here below the other imports. And then take the new maps package code here. And in the same file, scroll down to the get packages function, add a comma after main React package, and add this entry. And with that, you should have everything you need to work with maps. Now let's see if that's the case. Let's first of all create a new component, and I'll name it users map.js. I'll import React in here from React, and I'll create my users map method where I receive props, and then where I simply have a function where I return JSX. And I will export users map as the default here, like this. And now in there, I want to use a view. So I'll import view from React Native. Like this, add it, because a view always makes up for a great container. I also want to import style sheet to define some styles thereafter. And I want to import my map. So I will import map view. That's simply how the component is named, though you could name this whatever you want. It's a default export from the package, from React Native maps. And with that, we can add a map inside our view here. So I can add a map view here, self-closing element. And this map view here needs some styling. So I'll create a new constant below my functional component, which I'll name styles, where I use style sheet create and pass our object to it. And there I'll for one create a new property named map container that will hold the styles the view receives. And here I simply want to use width 100%. Needs to be wrapped in quotation marks then. And height maybe 200. This will be pixels automatically. Don't add a unit here. And then I'll add my map property, where I will simply set width to 100% and height to 100% to take the width and height of the container. Now for the view here, I'll add the style prop and set it equal to styles.mapContainer. And for the map view, I'll add style and set it equal to styles.map. With that, let's save this and let's use this component. Let's head over to app.js and let's import it. So import users map from /components users map. And let's add it below the fetch location component, users map, just like that. Now, since we added a library that accesses native device features, I strongly recommend restarting the whole development server. So quit this terminal, you can see it already crashed here and that's pretty normal, and rerun npm run Android. Before you do so, even go so far to close the app here and uninstall it from your device like this. Thereafter, rerun npm run Android to get a clean new build, a new development workflow, and a new version of the app shipped to your simulator. With that restarted, I'll again turn on live reloading and connect my remote JavaScript debugging, and you should see the map. You might also see a blank map because it can be tricky to configure this correctly. In that case, you'll find a link with a lot of discussions and solutions to that in the video description. Also make sure, because that's one common source, that in your credentials page here, if you go to library, you can go to Google Maps Android API that this is enabled. Enable it otherwise if this is not the case. With that, you should see the map here. Now it would be nice to have some margin between the map and the button. So I'll quickly go to my user's map and add a style to the map container where I say margin top of 20 maybe. And now, of course, we wanna maybe show a different snippet, a different part of the world when it loads, and also move the focus of the map once the user picked a location. Now, for starting with a certain region being focused on the map, let's have a look at the official docs here on Airbnb Create React Native Maps. So on this GitHub repository you found via Google. There, if you scroll down, you will find a code snippet where we set an initial region prop to some object that has a latitude, a longitude, and a latitude delta and a longitude delta. Now this is how you describe a region in or for the React Native Maps package. A region has a latitude and longitude for the center basically, and then the deltas for both coordinates to describe a circle or a part around that center. So how far do we go to left and right and to top and bottom from that point? So I'll just copy that setup here into our code for the map view here. So there, let's simply set initial region. And the important point about initial region, by the way, is that this will only be set initially, as the name implies, and will not refocus if you ever were to change this during runtime. And here I will maybe decrease this a little bit to zoom in closer. If I now save this and we go back to our application, you see we're zoomed in on San Francisco here. So this is the initial region. I now also want to focus onto the place the user sits in when I got that user location. So for that, I'll go back to the app.js file, and in there, I'll add my state property because I want to manage all the application state in here. You can also use Redux with React Native. I won't do it in this video. It's basically as easy to add as you add it to a normal React app, and I will also cover it in my Udemy course if you're interested. So here I'll set the normal state as you set it in any React component, any class-based component. And here I'll set this user location to null initially. Now, if we got a position here, I will call this set state, and there I will set user location to an object where I have a latitude property that is equal to position, and there we had a chords object, and there we had a latitude property too. And I will set a longitude property that's equal to position chords longitude. Now I also need to set the delta since I want to not only navigate to a point, but also keep a certain zoom. So I will just copy longitude and latitude from there, or alternatively hard code it in there. So whatever approach you want to use, feel free to do so. I'll simply copy it here and add it to my user location. And with that, we got that in the state. Now we want to pass it down to user's map. So there, I'll pass a user location property and bind it to this state user location. And in user's map, we now need to accept this property and do something with it. As I said, changing the initial region at runtime won't do much, but we can also set the normal region. And this will be updated during runtime. So we can set this equal to props user location, the prop we just added, and it will then focus on that location on the map. Now with that, if we go back and we click get location, you should move to basically the Googleplex. This is where they sit. Would be nice to also see a marker, wouldn't it? Of course, we can display one. In the map view, Let's convert it from a self-closing tag to a non-self-closing one, because in between the opening and closing tag, we can add another component, the mapView.marker component. And check out the docs of React Native Maps for a full list of all the components and features they have. They have a lot. MapViewMarker is a self-closing one. It needs a coordinate prop, and this is now not a region. It doesn't care about deltas. It just wants a position defined by latitude and longitude. So here to coordinate, we can also just pass props user location. This object will have the deltas, but it will just ignore them here, so that's fine. If we reload, we'll get an error. Do you know why? Because initially in app.js, our user location is null. So we try to set a marker on a position we don't have at the beginning. The solution is simple. Only render this if we got a user position. So here, prior to returning something in that function, I'll create a new variable, user location marker, which is null. But then I'll check if props user location is trueish, so if it's not null, then user location marker will be that marker code. And then I can just output this variable, user location marker, down there in my JSX code. This is how we conditionally render content in React. With that, now it works again. And if I click get location, we center onto our position and we also have that marker, which is great. Now, of course, we don't just want to have our location, we want to see that location of other users too, right? Now, in order to do this, we need to store it on a server in a database, and we need to fetch it from there. Now, I will use Firebase as a backend, and for that, I created a new Firebase project by visiting Firebase page, going to the console, creating a new project. And in that new project, you should go to the database tab and take the real-time database. In there, visit the rules and make sure that read and write are both set to true so that anyone can read and write to your database. Not settings you want to use in production, but settings which are great for our dummy app here. In production, you typically have an authentication flow to only allow authenticated users to post data and read data. But here, we won't add authentication. I instead will send a HTTP request, a post request to this endpoint and a nested URL actually to store my place on this database. And of course, you could use any other backend too. I just use Firebase because it's easy to use. If you got your own backend, definitely use that. The approach I show you here will work with any backend. So we want to send a request here whenever we got the user location. So what I will do is, after calling setState, I will send a HTTP request with the fetch API. Now the fetch API is basically the modern replacement for XML HTTP request in JavaScript, you could say. It's a browser API, which is made available to you by React Native. You can find more information about this in the JavaScript environment page I showed you earlier in the video. And the fetch API, as a first argument, takes a URL you want to send your request to. So that's this Firebase URL. And there I actually want to target a places node. And for Firebase, I need to add .json at the end. It's really just a Firebase database thing. You don't need to add this for your own backend. And places, this will create a new places node. Now I want to send a post request, so I need to set up a second argument here. One argument only would send a get request. The second argument is a JavaScript object where I configure this request, for example, by setting method to post, turning this from a get to a post request. And again, this is just a normal fetch API. If it's unclear to you how it works, check out some docs on it. It's just React Native's implementation of it. Now, we send a post request. We also need to send a body. So let's specify a body property. And this now needs to be a JSON string. So we can use JSON stringify to turn a JavaScript object into such a string. And I just want to send an object that holds a latitude and a longitude. So I will just copy latitude and longitude from there. I don't care about the deltas. I just want to store positions which I will use for markers that don't care about deltas either. And with that, we send this to Firebase. Now, fetch gives us back a promise, so I can chain then here to get back a response and log that response to the console, and catch to catch any errors during that. Not server-side errors or 404 errors, but errors due to connectivity problems, for example. Now, if we save that, and I click get location, I get back a 200 response, so that's looking good. Looks like it worked. If I check out Firebase, I see the places node, and in there a new element with this cryptic ID. That's an ID automatically generated by Firebase. And in there I see my latitude and longitude, so that's looking promising. We're storing data. Obviously we want to get it to output markers of other users too. So what I'll first of all do is I'll just get my location again, hence creating a second object with the same coordinates, but now we'll manually tweak the coordinates a little bit, set this to 8, 2 maybe here, and the latitude to 4, 1. So just tiny adjustments so that it doesn't go all the way to the other end of the world. And hitting enter helps in saving these changes, by the way, so make sure to save them. And now we got two different positions, which I want to see if I see different markers. You could of course also launch your app on a second device and it should work if you then get a different location there. Now we need a button to fetch the location. So I will add a button here above my fetch location component. I need to import that button from React Native, therefore. And I will wrap this button in a view component simply because this view element makes it easy for me to style that. And I will add inline style here, which you can do. Don't have to bind to a style sheet object, though it is preferred. But here I'll quickly add an inline style where I say margin bottom to 20 to have some distance to the fetch location button. Now I'll give this button a title of get user places, and on press we'll execute a method. Now I'll add this method here. I'll name it get user places handler like this. So let's target this here, this get user places handler. And in that method I'll again send a fetch request. I'll copy the logic from this fetch request here actually. But I will not send a second argument because I want to send a get request to this node. So just like that. On the other hand, I don't just want to log the response. Instead, I will call log response JSON here to take the JSON out of it. And then in the next then call, I'll have the parsed response. This is essentially how fetch works. We first of all get back the response with the code and the unparsed data body, and then with JSON we can parse that and we get back the body in a JavaScript object form. So here we have this object, and that's an important thing. We probably want to have an array to conveniently loop through it and output a couple of markers for the different items in the array. On Firebase, we store everything in this object format though. So here we got the places object, which has these cryptic strings here as properties, and then the values would be these objects here. So we have nested objects where these are the keys. We need to convert that object into an array therefore. So I'll create a new places array here, which is an empty array at the beginning. And then with a for in loop, where I get my keys of parsed response, I can extract these places. So I can then call places array push and push a new JavaScript object there where I will have a latitude. We need that for the marker, which is parsed response for that given key. And then there will be a latitude property because we're storing latitude and longitude there. And therefore the same, of course, for longitude. And then I'll add a third element, third property, which I'll name ID, which will be just my key. That cryptic key, so that I have that stored here too, will be helpful for looping, would be helpful if you add some update functionality or delete functionality. This is the ID under which it is stored on Firebase. Now that array needs to be stored in the state of this component. So I'll add a user places array, which is empty initially, to my state. And then here, where I got my places in an array, outside of the for in loop, I'll set this or call this set state. And now set state should set the state of user places equal to my places array I got here. With that, I got an array of these places. I, of course, want to output them on my map, though. So to my map component, I'll pass user places. You can name this property whatever you want. And I'll bind it to this state user places to pass it on to the user's map. So in there, we will now have a prop user places under which we can get the places of our users. Maybe we should name this property here in the state users places. So update it down there where you call set state2, as well as here where you pass it on. And let's rename the prop to user places too. In the user's map component, I now want to create as many markers as needed. So I'll create my user's markers component here, a constant here, and use props, users places, this new prop we just added, with the map method, as you always do it in React for outputting an array of elements in JSX. In there, I'll get my user place, and I want to return a map view.marker component where I bind the coordinate to user place, because that is an object that has a latitude and longitude key or property. And I also want to set the key, since we're having a loop here. So that is the default logic in React arrays, basically. You need a key. Set the key to user place ID. Like that. So this is the marker I output for each element in my user places array. So now I got this user's markers constant, which I can output next to my user location marker. And if we do all of that and we save all the files and we reload our application, we should be able to go down, zoom out a little bit by holding Command Control and then just dragging. And first of all, click Get User Places. Whoops, a little bit further down. And see these two places here near the Googleplex. And these are indeed the places we added and edited on Firebase. And this is it. This is of course only a rough introduction to React Native. There is much more you can do with it, with the styling. You can access the camera, add authentication, create responsive designs, all of that covered in my Udemy course in case you're interested. But I hope that this was a great introduction to it, that you got a feeling for how you work with React Native, how you start a project, how you add packages that need native device features, how you work with components, build your own components, work with the web, with a backend. And now you can dive into the official docs and or my course, or of course some other tutorial to learn more about it. Would be great to welcome you in my course, would be great to welcome you in future videos here on this channel. Have a great day. Bye.